and hence the nature of the paper before us. But I have received notification from Councillor Coombe of an amendment that at least expresses our support in principle for localism, which I think is important, and that I'm happy to accept that as part of the resolution. And I'll move the resolution, maybe seconded by Councillor Coombe.
Just a clarification. We just need to say to make any minor changes.
Oh, yep.
To reflect the support for localism.
Yep.
Because that's what the changes would be.
Okay. No, that's fine, and Councillor will be welcome a chance for you to speak to that paper. But if we begin, Marguerite or Warwick, who's leading on this one? Warwick.
Yes, just to confirm the Mayor's review of the process to date. As I understand it, having looked back on it, LGNZ has been talking about this idea of localism, I think, since about 2018, and again at the AGM this year. But it was only about July, August that we received the discussion paper, which had an invitation to respond by the 15th of December. We couldn't put a paper together that represented your views because we are not aware of your views and we haven't had a chance to talk to you about your views. And so, as Mayor Goff has said, this is really just a background paper. It reflects a little bit on our history, and it reflects on our various relationships with central government that have occurred up to this point in time, but it makes no comment at all about whether we are in favour of further devolution, additional funding powers, and so on. I think I might leave it there, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Warwick. So begin with questions, and Councillor Cooper, followed by Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support localism, of course. I just am wondering, given that we are so different in our organisational structure from the rest of Auckland, we have local boards and there's quite a lot of devolution already. I do worry what we are speaking into in our submission, how it is taken, because how do local government New Zealand compare and make those allowances? And I say that because we're quite sufficient. We are. I mean, I know local boards would argue this, but we're so devolved that we have no say at a regional level other than the budget and what happens in local boards area. They get to make their own decisions, and that's right. I worry that even more devolution, more localism means that as regional councillors and people elected from our own local areas, we get so divorced for it we don't even know what's happening, and that concerns me because communities ask us what's happening, and often we don't know. And so to me, there's a balance around this, around being so local that the regional councillors are even told we can't even find out, or, you know, and so those are the sort of, that's why I'm asking. I don't want it to push it that far.
Okay, I just wasn't sure whether it was a comment or a question, but the question is, the extent to which the paper goes. I see the paper as reflecting largely on devolution from central to local council rather than from governing body to local board, but I'll ask officers to clarify that.
Certainly that the same thought went through, was in my mind in preparing this. We are so much larger than other councils, and there are district councils which have far fewer population than some of our local boards. So there is a real range and diversity of councils throughout the country, and that needs to be part of the debate. And I should have said before that the other purpose that I saw this paper being is to be of use to our LGNZ representatives, so that when the discussion happens down at Wellington at LGNZ, then they have some background and they are also aware of your own views and your comments that you are making now.
Thank you. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. Yes, I support Papa and your recommendation there. My question, a couple of questions. In that, there's, I mean, you read the forward and it just is like reading the relationship between the governing body and local boards. And so there is such a power of information for local boards to provide, and will you be able to get to them, to be able to get that from them. I would like them to know that this is around, that submissions don't close until the 15th. Is there an opportunity for that to happen? Because this is an opportunity for LGNZ to get some really grunty stuff from the local boards.
Your Worship, we've already had brief discussions with staff and local board services. We'll explore those opportunities to see if that can happen by the 15th.
Sorry. I have 2 more points.
Yep, please, Councillor.
One is there an opportunity for it to be kept on the governance political working party, the joint governance political working party, as a piece of, I don't know a piece of what going forward, because I can see that what they're doing is actually informing their advocacy to central government for the next election, or to politicians for the next election, but it would be good to have an oversight of where it is sitting at any point in time and the opportunity for us to continue to provide feedback.
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. We can keep the Joint Governance Working Party abreast of how it evolves.
And my last one is there an opportunity to amend, I know it's a feedback document, we haven't consulted broadly on it, but the Māori impact statement is dismissive of Auckland Council's role for Māori. So we've stated there, look, we've got the IMSB, they're independent, but actually we have a commitment, and it's stated throughout our plans, and I just think that it should be acknowledged in there, Auckland Council's responsibility to the outcomes for Māori.
Through the chair, we can do this, and I would probably add this as an extra recommendation then, so that it can be wrapped up and reviewed by the councillor who will make those final changes, if you so wish.
Thank you. Councillor Coombe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to frame this as a question because I do also want to talk to it. On the way through, in terms of the localism paper, it kind of ignore the fact that local boards and the structure of Auckland's governance is already localism in practice. And so I think this is trying to support that by saying, you know, we already operate on the principle of subsidiarity. I can never say that word. Subsidiarity. And also it ignored that with iwi and hapu is already localism, and that was kind of ignored in the paper going through. So I guess, to put this as a question, it's more to, is there opportunity just to put into our feedback that yes, we're providing the context of Auckland, but does this then provide what we're proposing, an opportunity just to make it clearer that we already we support localism, we're trying to do it in practice, and this is more to be very clear on that support, so that going forward we can say that this is actually a model that needs to be given more strength, and it is more about bolstering local government's conversation with central government, and it's tied into the funding picture of where we're given additional responsibilities but we're not given the funding to match. So it's kind of going both ways, because we ask for more responsibilities, we ask for devolution, and then we don't get the funding attached. So that is a question of how we can just ensure that that's reflected in our feedback.
Through the chair. So the paper was written as a background paper, just because we didn't have time to engage with you and go around local boards. We were very clear that what we were providing was background as opposed to direct feedback and opinions. So we have, in the way it was drafted, it tends to be neutral. So if you want to go into the taking a position, obviously will be guided by you around the table as to whether you want us to change our submission to include that.
Councillor Fletcher.
you can rule this out of order, but I have attempted on other occasions to raise it. But for me, I am just not persuaded, and I know we've got a big sister role for or big brother role, if you like, for the rest of the local government, New Zealand, with the council, given the earlier debate we had. I mean, we are the largest local government entity in Australasia. We are trying to do a great amount that is going where no man has been before. I'm wanting at some point to have the answer given to me in terms of bangs for bucks with our investment in local government New Zealand. And I do understand the broader context, but this perhaps is a debate for another day.
I just concurring with your last comment, Councillor. Look,
I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to be consistent.
I think you've made your point, but the point around our role and relationship with Local Government New Zealand is one that needs to be dealt with separately and as an agenda item rather than as part of a feedback on a specific issue. So we've noted your point and you've made it, but I don't think we can make that determination here. If there are no other questions, I think we should move on to comments because I think there will be a few. Councillor Darby to begin with.
Sorry.
It's a question, is it?
I'm really welcoming this paper. I think this is incredible work of local government. I've been a bit resigned about Local Government New Zealand, but I'm actually starting to wake up to its new iteration. It's starting to look a lot better than it ever has in my eyes. So this paper is a really interesting paper, and it talks about a recession in democracy, and I referred to some of that evidence of that recession earlier, and that's why with Councillor Coombe heading this work, I think we should really participate very, very strongly here. Have we satisfied the questions that they raise? There's about 15 questions there. Should we be satisfying them? Because I can't quite see that we've covered it. Localism is the future. It is not about central government control or big chunky councils exercising the control. The structure that we have here now will be redundant in 10 years. I can tell you that. And localism is the new future. And you've only got to look at countries. Sorry, there is comment here, isn't there?
No, yeah. Can we come to the yeah? I'll make this. I think we'll just move straight to the comments, and I'll take this as your commentary.
So localism is the future. And if you look at Switzerland, it has been the future there for a long time, and it's a massively successful economy, and it's a public-facing governance from central government right down to local communities. And this paper is headed up localising power and decision-making to councils and communities. Let's not forget that it's not just about subsets of council, but it's actually ultimately to communities. And we've got some massive gaps there at the moment. I guess my comment, because I won't go through the detail, is I think we should actually, in the C there, delegate authority for a bit more than making some minor changes. I think we haven't had the opportunity to really thrash this out. I would like Councillor Coombe and others, all of us, to provide some feedback here that is a bit more than what's in the attachment, quite a lot more actually, because this is really chunky work. We've got a serious role to play. We are the one council that's undertaken significant restructuring, whereas most others have not. Have we gone in the right direction? I would suggest yes and no. But I would suggest there's a lot more that we can say here about localism. Is there a willingness to go beyond just the minor tweaks there and get a bit of discussion on this going?
Thank you very much. I understand your comments. I'm just a bit. I think to do this properly, we needed to properly workshop it and to think about it in depth, and we won't be able to do that simply in the nature of the debate that we'll have in the time frame here. But what I'd like to suggest, and I'm not very appreciative of Local Government New Zealand doing it in the time frame that they have. I think that's been a bad decision by them. because the issues are important and they need more consideration than either I see in their paper or we're able to give them in this time frame. But what I would suggest, Councillor, is that next year we actually embark on a serious discussion in this area. Now, it may not be timely to feed into Local Government New Zealand, but we need to establish what our views are. And I think a lot of us would say, well, it starts with devolution of funding, because we don't want more responsibilities unless we have devolution of funding, which is implicit in that paper. And at the moment, we get devolution of responsibility without funding, and we get 7% of the entire country's public revenue to local government and 93% to central government. And you start at that position and then work out, particularly in a council the size of our council, what other functions is it appropriate to devolve to us? But I don't think we can do that in the space of the discussion today. Anyway, Councillor Watson, sorry to intrude in that way.
That's all right. Thank you. So I've just got a couple of comments to make, Mr. Byrne. I can't help but think there's a bit of a lost opportunity here today, and I fully acknowledge the difficulties of the timing with the elections and all the rest of it. But when it's all said and done, if we look at our paper here in the conclusion, we're going to be saying we've not had the opportunity for Council to formally consider that and form a view on localism. And I think in the context of the other review we're talking about to do with the CCOs, that this is a kind of logical counterbalance that we should be considering. One of the earlier speakers talked about options and referred to, you know, the stadiums, about what's the option. Well, there actually are clear options on that have been very enunciated. If we go to the CCO model, localism is an option that can be considered also. And we're not even going to get that information out in some way to the public realm. No one's going to make a decision on it at this point, but it's something, as Councillor Darby said, we should be thinking of, because things are changing fast in the world. Our interactions with the government that are quite helpful, that are outlined in the paper, really, if you're a little critical of those interactions, you'll see that not much has come of them. I mean, if we look at this social issues board that never came into fruition back, nearly a decade ago, we had $12 billion going into social issues around Auckland to deal with deprivation of one sort or another. I'd hate to think what that figure is now, and the council's just not involved in that in any shape or form, despite the fact numbers of councillors in here who represent the wards, and I would suggest arguably know a lot more about their wards than government MPs or ministers sitting down in Wellington. Similarly, they asked the ministers about the Auckland plan. Well, I haven't had too many MPs, Labor, National or any other creed, really talking to me about the Auckland plan in any shape or form. So these interactions, you know, at best have been minimal, and at worst I just don't even register with the MPs at all. Councillor Darby referred to Switzerland, and it's a little disappointing. We have some excellent academic research taking place at the Auckland University with some of the graduate students to do with localism, and that is information that I think is useful to get out and would be helpful in a submission. I mean, and I can't help but think of Councillor Webster, bless her soul, who used to sit round this table, who often talked about this fund.
She's not departed, Councillor.
Well, she's departed from this institution, that's for sure. She talked about this funding gap, and you know the fact that in New Zealand local government receives 11% of total public expenditure, whereas in OECD countries it's 30%. So that's very significant, and people need to know that across New Zealand. Councillor Coombe referred to the benefits to Maori. We spend a lot of time on Maori impact this and Maori impact that, but if we're talking about the localist nature of the Maori socio-political organisation, localism is very at the centre of that and has, you know, identifiable benefits, just as improving economic performance, civic participation, and addressing the needs of individual communities. And again, Switzerland is a good example of that, a really good example. There, 80% of Swiss citizens express confidence in their government, as opposed to 19% in Auckland who express trust and satisfaction in Auckland Council, 60% different. The political units in Switzerland are about 3,500 people, where in New Zealand they're about 61,000. So that's a huge difference. In Switzerland, if you have a successful localised council, if we can use that term, they compete against each other, because people will go and live in the areas where the smaller body does well. So there's an inherent competition based into their council structure. So it's not just, you know, giving money out and there's no return on that. So I think, Mr. Mayor, if we looked at this as a whole, there are a number of features we could be commenting on here. Quality service provision, I heard better even it up with, having mentioned Councillor Webster, with Councillor Sayers, has an interest in procurement, where local communities can set about their own procurement and at, as anyone you often talk to, at far lower prices than council does, and has the ability to deliver projects quicker and more efficiently. Now, we haven't gone down that road at all after nearly a decade. So as far as localism goes, there's opportunities there that we should be considering. We have supposedly a form of localism in the local boards, but not really. The local boards are actually, in a number of instances, bigger than the legacy councils, if you look at a population basis comparison. So they could be a starting point where that kind of localist type theory, as sort of articulated by some of these really good pieces of research that are done at Auckland University, could be filtered through an exploratory nature. So if I concede that it's difficult to do something now, but I support the notion that if there are local boards that wish to make some, cursory comments, then it's to our advantage to do that, because I think this is the way of the future, and it is something that will contrast quite starkly with the model that we currently utilise now.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll be brief. The issue that's been posed here is not going away. It's new, but it's not going away. So we've got plenty of time as this iterates through, like LG and Z. It is gaining traction, and it's been a bit of a slow road to now. The point I'm making is very similar to what you made, Mr. Mayor, and that is that we, as a council, we have a 10-year funded budget and things like ATAP, a 30-year design plan or design manual. But we're reliant on our half-share funding for ATAP from the Crown, which runs on an annual budget and at best a 3-year GPS. And we look at challenges facing Auckland, but also the rest of New Zealand, with billions of dollars worth of wastewater treatment plants and potable water systems need to go in, deficit infrastructure in rail, motorway networks and arterials. We've got a serious issue as a nation to challenge ourselves with here about how we deliver these things. And we can have a localism component, but unless that's associated with a really direct and guaranteed funding stream, we're not going to get the best value for our dollar, because we can't do the smart procurement on scale of a pathway or a pipeline of projects that gives you a best kick. So the localism is part of this discussion, but there's a whole other section that's got to be brought into by Wellington, and I think we need to push that argument pretty hard as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm all good with localism. The whole devolution from central to local government is good, but taking it that one step further and having more devolution to our community organisations that operate locally, because I honestly do believe the hood can take care of the hood. It just needs to be resourced to do that. And if it can be done through this localism thing, then all good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Walker.
Just want to make a couple of comments. I think this paper on the part of Local Government New Zealand is really refreshing, and I would suggest that there's a lot of information that people in New Zealand just aren't aware of. The fact that we're arguably the most centralised country on the planet when it comes to government control. That's big government control compared to little government. The comparison with Switzerland that Councillor Watson has described, the far better and I'd repeat, far better participation in democracy where you do have localism. And I know, Marguerite, you're going to a role where obviously you're going to be focusing on that, and quite obviously it follows that we could be picking up on this. So I think the particular concern I've got is that local government New Zealand's got limited resources. In many respects, we've got a much greater resource. And what I'd put to you, Mr. Mayor, is we should be publicising some of this information so that we get a conversation going in our community. So what does it look like, and how does it apply to Auckland? And how much better could it look? And that might also go to this conversation that's occurring around the CCOs, because I don't think that that reflects localism at all. So, Mr. Mayor, how can we actually promote this information? Because I don't think many people are aware of it.
I might come to that when I make my comments, Councillor. I'd like to put before Council as a proposal, I'll do it now, that we ask officers to prepare a full response to the LGNZ paper to be considered by probably first a workshop in the governing body in 2020. We're having a really interesting discussion, but it's not taking us anywhere because we don't have the factual basis for making specific recommendations. I think the concept is important, but I'm just a little bit reluctant to put Switzerland. I know Councillor Watson and the Deputy Mayor have both said Switzerland, wonderful country. Also the last country to give votes to the women. Also the country that is entirely monocultural. Also the country that subsidises cows to such an excessive extent that I'm surprised that Farmer Cashmore would even consider their model. So, you know, it may not be the most progressive model of democracy in the world. It might work for them in the way they do it, but not necessarily for us. But I think the issues that each of you that have spoken to date have raised are important. And I really want to move from the rhetoric of how we get devolution of funding and give us our share of GST on local rates back to the council to something where we can put out a proper proposal to LGNZ and to the government. And there are other things that we might consider in that session as well. I'm conscious when I became mayor, I remember the then Minister of Finance in the National Party saying that, you know, having a meeting with 7 or 8 ministers and the Auckland Council was a half day of his life he'll never get back. And I think there'll be a few people sympathetic to his view in that regard. But we also need to consider as a council how we can better interact with central government than we are at the moment. I talk to the Labour Party caucus, the National Party caucus. They come in and see me from time to time. We did have several meetings with ministers. I think we should put them on a more regular agenda so that we can have that direct interchange with ministers and the portfolios that are important. But I'd like that to come together in a paper and a proper discussion that we can't have within the context of discussing this paper. So I think the recommendation I'm putting up there under D covers the points that I've just spoken to. I'm sorry, Councillor Coombe, I've interrupted the flow of speakers and you're the next speaker.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did just want to speak as the seconder, but I'm very happy with your amendment. And I just wanted to make a point of clarification just in terms of whether you felt comfortable under C that it does say that we're just going to make minor changes to this paper, but what I'm hearing is at this point it is kind of more than minor. I mean, it just goes to the substance and even asking for this next stage. So whether we just need to take out that minor word, because we are making the changes based on what we've just been talking.
Yeah, I think the challenge that I have is that what we want to say in this paper, we haven't had the in-depth discussion to be able to say, but maybe in terms of editorialising of the letter to Mike Reid, we can say, look, we are really interested in the concept of localism. We're interested in particular in how we can devolve funding to enable us to do more things without going cap in hand on every issue to central government, but we haven't had time to consider that. We intend to consider it and come back to local government New Zealand. Would everybody be supportive of that commentary being added to? I think that's
good. So which is just making the changes. They are more than minor. So we just suggest removing
maybe
that word
remove
minor.
the word minor, and if we make changes to that effect, because at the moment, and I understand all the problems that we're facing officers, they've had no guidance from us, so how could they put the paper together? But it does feel like a not appropriately adequate response to a really important issue.
Yes.
And we just need to emphasise, you've got it in your paper, or you've got it in the paper to us, but it needs to be emphasised in the submission. So if I can maybe ask Councillor Coombe if you'd like to take charge of working with officers.
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. And do you want me, can I speak in just to support
sure,
just
please.
a few comments just in terms of supporting this bit of work, and thank you to the officers for having put together the feedback initially. And I think what we're hearing is that we can strengthen it because, as I mentioned before, what we do in Auckland is very much based on the principles of localism, and we can actually provide quite a lot of guidance to the rest of the countries about how we can make local boards work effectively and the governance model working effectively, which is completely consistent with our previous item, as Councillor Watson noted, with the CCO review. So they do all go hand in hand. So I'm really pleased that we will strengthen this because this is also one of the priorities of LGNZ. And as I am dedicating some time to being on that, being the Auckland Council representative, I do want to have some meaning to that role, and I have reflected on Councillor Fletcher's comments about why do we even really bother with LGNZ, and I think that is a valid point because we are very big and we can do a lot ourselves, but LGNZ I think has come a long way in the time that we've been a super city, and they are doing some great work and they are advocating on our behalf and on the sector of local government. So I think if it's, I've got 2 days next week that I'm going to be in a strategy session. So if I don't want to be there wasting my time or my colleagues' time because I'm going to miss things around this table. So I really would like to be able to go there feeling that we've got a very strong position and that we take this as a priority and that it's worthwhile us being involved in LGNZ. Otherwise, I might as well quit now because I think there's going to be a lot of work in the next 3 years. So I do commend this bit of work, and I think, Mr Mayor, that's a good idea, the addition of D, that this is seen as just a start rather than just our first only opportunity to comment. So thank you. I do support that going forward.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a very quick point from me. Just looking at the report and the Māori impact statement, I think that just mentioning that the IMSB, that point is probably missing the point a little bit around what we're talking about, because in fact there are huge opportunities for Māori when we're looking at devolution. And I really applaud this council for things such as the Tūpunamanga Authority, which is in the spirit of that already. And I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that tangata whenua having powers devolved to them and working in co-governance with them is a really exciting part of localism. And I just wanted to emphasise that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So I think that's exhausted our list of speakers. So the recommendations as amended are in front of you there. I'll put them as a block. All those